The history teacher who outwitted the Gestapo. Meet the history teacher turned resistance heroine who outwitted the Gestapo and rescued her husband, more than once, from captivity. A born rebel, Lucy Bernard was born in 1912 in the small commune of Châtel-de-Saint-Tenay-sur-Seine in north-central France, southeast of Paris. As a teenager, she rebelled against her parents' wishes by refusing to train as a primary school teacher, a solid position that would have helped her working-class family move up the social ladder. Instead, she moved to Paris by herself at the age of 19 and began studying to gain entrance to the elite Sorbonne. Lucy and Raymond Albrecht. Credit: Chicago Review Press. The principle of refusal, l'orifice, in French that would define Lucy's life, developed early, according to Châtel-de-Saint-Henri, author of the recently published Lucy Albrecht, the French resistance heroine who outwitted the Gestapo, the first English-language biography of Lucy. She never deviated from her principles or political beliefs, the most important of which was the guarantee of liberty. Reese writes, troubled by the poverty she saw in Paris during the Great Depression, Lucy became an enthusiastic member of the French Communist Party. She finally qualified to enter the Sorbonne in 1937 and graduated in only a year, winning her first teaching post at a lycée, one of France's state-funded secondary schools, in Strasbourg, located on the Rhine River just 2 miles from France's border with Germany. Wartime love story. In 1939, she met and fell in love with Raymond Samuel, an engineering student from a well-to-do Jewish family. Later that year, she was preparing to leave for the United States, having won a scholarship grant, but on September 1st, 4 days before Lucy was to sail for New York, German troops invaded Poland, prompting Britain, France and other allied nations to declare war on Germany. Lucy cancelled her voyage, managing to get across France and smuggle herself into Strasbourg, by then off-limits to civilians, by convincing army medics to carry her on a stretcher. Reunited, she and Raymond married that December. Raymond Albrecht during World War II. Credit: Epic. After 9 months of facing off with French troops across the border, Germany attacked France in the spring of 1940, and Raymond was one of nearly 2 million French soldiers captured in only a few weeks of fighting. The humiliated French government turned to Marshal Philippe Pétain, the 84-year-old hero of World War I, who promptly signed an armistice with Germany. Knowing she had to rescue her husband before he was transferred to a Nazi POW camp in Germany, Lucy again made a perilous crossing through France to where he was being held in Sarrebourg. During a brief visit, she discreetly passed Raymond a drug that would cause a fever. When he was transferred to a hospital, she was able to smuggle in a disguise that allowed him to escape. The young couple stayed in a hotel, where most of the other guests were German officers, before fleeing on a train to Lyon, the most important city in France's so-called free zone. Joining the resistance. Unlike many in France, Lucy was never under any illusion that Pétain's government, headquartered in the spot town of Vichy, was legitimate. In the fall of 1940, following her tried-and-true principle of l'orifice, Lucy became one of the earliest members of the French resistance, the growing movement dedicated to undermining the Vichy regime. Even as she apparently lived a dutiful life as wife, mother, Jean-Pierre, known as Boubou, was born in 1941, and teacher. Lucy was also an underground freedom fighter, helping to publish the journal Liberation, delivering packages, distributing propaganda and helping imprisoned resistors escape. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Lyon, in 1944. Credit: Gabriel Hackett, Hulton Archive. By the end of 1942, the Germans occupied all of France. Large-scale deportations of Jews had begun, though no one was aware of the horrific reality of the final solution at that time. That winter, Klaus Barbie of the Geheimstaatspolizei, or Gestapo, arrived in Lyon. In an effort to infiltrate and crush the resistance, he favored interrogating and turning captured resistors into double agents. In March 1943, the Gestapo arrested Raymond, who was by then using the surname Albrecht. Though he was in charge of recruitment and training of soldiers for the resistance organization Liberation Sud, Raymond, arrested under the alias Fran-A-Section-Is Valet, was released after convincing the Germans he was only selling things on the black market. Outwitting the Gestapo. On June 21, however, Raymond was arrested again, along with the chief resistance leader Jean Moulin, in a Gestapo raid in the Lyon suburb of Caluire. Barbie and his officers beat and tortured both men. Moulin would later die from his injuries. It was while Raymond was being held in Montluc prison that Lucy, pregnant with their second child at the time, visited Barbie to ask that her affiance be released due to his ill health. After Barbie flatly rejected her pleas, Lucy returned again, and he informed her that Raymond, or rather, Offran section his valet, had been sentenced to death. Page from an American comic book detailing Lucy's resistance work. Credit: Chicago Review-Press. Even as Lucy visited Lyon's morgues, hoping not to find her husband's body, she didn't give up on her rescue plan. She gained access to another German officer and won his sympathy, citing a French law allowing prisoners condemned to death to marry. The ruse worked, and on October 21 the meeting took place at Gestapo headquarters. An hour later, as the Germans transported Raymond back to prison, Lucy and several other armed members of the resistance attacked the van, killing several German officers and freeing Raymond along with 16 other prisoners. National heroes exposed and wanted by the Nazis. The Albrechts went into hiding with their young son, moving from safe house to safe house until they were finally evacuated to Britain in February 1944. Lucy gave birth to a daughter, Catherine, only days after their arrival. The Allied press celebrated the couple and especially Lucy for their heroism, and held them up as symbols of the valiant French resistance. Soon after June 6, 1944, when British and U.S. troops landed successfully in Normandy, Lucy traveled back to France as a representative of the Free French government of Charles de Gaulle. She was on hand in Paris on August 25, when the German garrison in that city surrendered to Allied troops and General de Gaulle addressed the jubilant crowds outside the Hôtel de Ville. Post-war legacy and controversy. The Albrechts' triumphant post-war return was tinged with sadness, as Raymond's parents had been deported to Auschwitz in January 1944. Lucy began teaching history again, and would spend the rest of her life speaking to thousands of students about the resistance. She also campaigned against discrimination, and on behalf of progressive causes, such as Algerian independence. In 1996, she was presented with France's highest award, the Legion of Honor, for her role in the resistance. Raymond and Lucy Albrecht, c. 1990s. Credit: Eric Fauger, Sigma via Getty Images. Controversy threatened to cloud the Albrechts' legacy after Klaus Barbie was arrested in Bolivia, where he had lived undercover since the 1960s. In 1984, while on trial in Lyon for his role in the deportation of Jews and the Final Solution, Barbie claimed Raymond Albrecht was an informant, and had been responsible for the arrest of Jean Moulin in 1943. To respond to such claims, Lucy wrote her own memoir of her wartime experiences, Outwitting the Gestapo, which became a bestseller in France. Historians have generally rejected Barbie's claims, made between 1983 and 1991, when he died in prison, and the Albrechts fought steadfastly to disprove them. In 1998, the couple won a libel suit against the journalist Gerard Chalvy, who published a book based largely on Barbie's information. A biography of Lucy Albrecht published by Laurent Duzou in 2009, 2 years after her death, delved deeply for the first time into her history. Despite his evident admiration of her work during the resistance, Duzou uncovered a number of distortions of fact in Lucy's memoir, including information about her birth and childhood, as well as events in her past that she seemingly misremembered or made up to lend more drama to her story. Rees, who drew on Duzou's work to write her own account of Lucy Albrecht's story, notes that one possible explanation of these fibs was that after such an eventful and amazing life, Lucy herself no longer really knew which of her own stories were true and which were fantasy.